Yeah, so thanks everyone and welcome today. As we said, we're touching on drought, but obviously a lot of the techniques that we're kind of talking about today can also be related to flooding as well. And I tend to think of water management as a topic that has almost three parts. So one part will be water quality, which we know with the farming rules water changes is quite topical at the moment as well. Obviously having too much water on farms and also too little. And as we said, today we're focusing on the too little and very apt. With the weather we've been having, I think it was the driest spring in nearly 100 years, or something they've said this year. And just having been recently to the Lake District and looking at Water Reservoir, it's a really stark reminder of just how little water we actually have out there. We all know the impacts of having too little water on farm and the kind of dry weather that's usually associated with little water. We've got livestock overheating, we've got poor grass growth, and in kind of cropping systems, we've got poor quality, poor yields, and even some like crop failure in some cases as well. So it's a really important topic, and we know that it's the impact to the water cycle from human intervention, whether that be kind of the increasing demands we are putting on our water resources, um, changes in land use and deforestation, through to the effects of climate change. It's becoming an ever increasing problem. And what we know is that ecological systems which are either lower functioning or degraded are often the most at risk from the impacts of climate change. And so what's really crucial going forward is thinking about how we can use sustainable and nature-friendly practices in order to rebuild our ecosystems and create that kind of on-farm resilience, and make ourselves a lot more resilient against these extremes in temperature and water scarcity. So I'm going to hand over to Martin now, who's going to give you a bit of background on some of the strategies he's implementing on his arable farm in Cambridgeshire. And then we're going to hand over to Paul, who will touch on what we can learn from climates where they experience drought in a much more extreme way than we do. I know certainly at Groundswell in previous years, I'm an Australian company, go, you can't miss a drought, you need to go to Australia. So yeah, we'll look at what we can learn from countries with hotter climates, and then also a little bit about how we can use trees to help with drought as well. We hear a lot about trees and flooding, and that trees can also be beneficial in drought situations. So Martin, hand over to you to take it away.
Lovely, thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity. So we farm just up the road in St Neots in Cambridgeshire, predominantly chalky boulder clay, 400 odd acres at home, but we're farming and managing just over 1,400 acres. Giving you some context, we normally get about 440 mil of rain a year. This year, since the 1st of July, since the 1st of January, we've had 140 mil of rain. At the same time last year, we'd had 360 mil of rain. This unpredictability of managing our soils and our system is becoming increasingly challenging, knowing what to do. Do we plant a crop in the autumn for a dry spring or for a wet spring? Going for drought-resilient tolerance, the drought-resilient varieties and genetic engineered crops that's meant to deliver solutions, for me, it's like playing Russian roulette. We need diversity, not single solution approaches. So on our own farm, we've gone through a journey of focusing on our soil health. I was really naughty one day when I was a lot younger and silly. I sat on the back of a plough going up the field and saw the compaction from the 2 years before in the bottom of the furrows of the tread prints. And what we're finding is we're all causing the compaction that made the fields wetter, tougher, stronger. That kind of we're buying bigger machinery to compact the soil more. And actually, if we focus around the functionality of the soil and so it can drain better and hold more water, that made our soil work better, reduced our costs, and improved the resilience within our system. And we've also been concentrating sort of minimum cultivation, cover crops. If we walk across a bare piece of soil, we leave, this tilled, we leave footprints. Walk across a grass or cover crop, you walk on sponges and roots. And that's the kind of mentality of keeping that functionality. If we had our compacted soils and you threw a bucket of water on it, it sits there or it runs off down the slope, which takes the nutrients and the topsoil off. But drill hundreds of holes into that, while like our roots and our worms are doing, the water filtrates through and it holds it there more like a sponge. But to build that sponge up, we also need to add organic matter. So we've been trying to add organic matter in through green cover crops, chopping the straw or bringing in manures wherever possible. And we've been doing organic measuring on our fields, not just the whole field, but breaking it down into areas. And then looking at how that works, we're also using satellite biomass imagery, looking at how healthy our crops are. And on dry years like this, we're seeing significant overlapping of where our crops have less biomass, are more stressed, have more disease, are directly related to the areas in the field that have low organic matter. So there's a direct correlation. We've took the organic matter out of our soils, and now our crops are getting stressed. So now, how do we build that back in as quickly as possible? But it's really finding that balance and finding organic matter that isn't high in nutrients, so we can concentrate the placement. We've tried compost, green waste compost, brilliant material, but it's full of contaminants in most situations, and I'm really concerned about getting that in our soil. So we're finding building that organic matter and the structure back into our soil holds more water. A couple of seasons ago, when it was really hot and sunny, my neighbours were out combining beginning of the season, and I was really frustrated. I could not find a crop that actually I could find that was fit to cut. It's only when we looked at with a satellite, someone's drone up, our crop still had a tinge of green to it. Theirs were dead. They're a heavy cultivated system, and it's these little small wins that so our crop stayed alive for another couple of weeks. So we may have built a bit more yield, a bit more benefits, and it's like that functionality of we don't always know what the wins are, but how do we build some evidence? How do we sort of step back and like compare with our system to someone who is not doing similar things to what we are and that multiple benefit? We also look at our water management within our catchments. In our heavy clay soils, I need the water to not sit there in ponds. I need it to move into ditches or off the thing. Once it's in the ditches, as long as it's not blocking the drainage, I don't want it to leave the farm like a racing car. I see so many farmers talking about we've got to dredge the rivers and straighten the dikes out. We want to slow the water down in our catchments. We want to slow it down in our ditches to soak into the soil as much as possible. So yeah, while we maintain our ditches, but we don't want it to leave. So can I leave a bit of debris in? Can I restrict it in places that won't flood the fields too much, but let it soak in? And also, we don't cut all the ditches and dikes every year. Leave that tall, tussly grass. It just slows the flow down, filters the waters out. But then we sort of do need to clean them out occasionally. And we also often put sump holes in the ditches to capture any sediment that's coming down the ditch, and it just captures that in. So then we can sort of join up that we're holding the water in the ditches. We're also improving and digging a lot more ponds on the farm. It's good for biodiversity, but it just means there's water on the farm. It stays there. It's also really handy when you get a fire on the farm in a drought year. You've got somewhere for the fire engine to dump its pump out. Years ago, we filled all the ponds in because we didn't have livestock that needed them. We actually need them back in our landscape. We need to join that back up. We also looked at our crop rotation. We were a pretty simple, wheat weight rotation 15 years ago. Now we're going sort of 6-7 different varieties in a real combination of approaches. Again, building resilience into our system. If I've got one or two crops and that year is not the year for that crop, we're in real trouble. But if it's only 10% of the farm, I can avoid the real risk of losing money on that approach. We've got a bit keen trying to grow sunflowers and millets and other things because they work really well in warmer North European climate. But the year we planted, it was the wettest, coldest spring out. So in 12 hectares of sunflowers, we had 6 sunflowers. I thought I was going to be doing photo opportunities of this massive field of sunflowers, pick your own and everything. It's a bit dismal kind of pickings. But so what are we planning? What have we got to do? It's not saying we shouldn't try that, but it's this unpredictability, and that's I'm finding a really challenging thing. But what we're going to do is de-risk that, so we do it in smaller bits, not large areas. We're also looking at what we've been finding is we put a lot of hedgerows back in. We don't do them in the middle of the fields, ours around the edges. We put flower strips in the middle, and we tall, tussly grass. What we've been finding is, particularly the last few days, few weeks, the crops can cope with quite a lot of heat. It cannot cope with the breeze. It's sucking the moisture out of our soil and out of our crops. But having those trees and hedges there are slowing the flow of air down. So instead of racing across Cambridgeshire large fields, that those trees and hedges can slow that flow of air down. That means there's less evaporation. It's actually more spray days if you need to, if you're on the other side, if you need to get out there. So we're now looking at what else can we put, where else can we put trees? Where do we put the shelter belts in? Where do we put some more hedges in? And it's like, which side of the fields do we need to do? Currently, we have a southwesterly prevailing wind most of the time. And we're finding as the heat comes in, we're getting more wind. So we're looking at strategically where can we put some more blocks of trees or bigger bushy hedges and everything to slow that flow of air down. And it's not just good for the water, it's blooming good for the biodiversity. Those hedges are my vertical flower march in spring and summer and a berry feast in the winter. And all those beneficiaries come and eat my pests. So we're not organic, but I don't need to spray insecticides, haven't done for 12 years, because we value those different habitats we put in the landscape. So for me, it's this joining up of what we try and do in our landscape, focusing on sort of a whole farm approach, but making water management actually key of that. Our soil are our bank accounts, and they're fed by water. And if we can link that together, we stay more profitable and more resilient going forward. And we know, if we look at the climate evidence, we've got some pretty disastrous weather coming. How will I be farming in a landscape with significantly less rain? Which crops do I go? What do I do? It goes back to diversity and opportunity. So there are solutions. I'm looking forward to some questions, but we've got to take steps and we've got to get moving on it today. Thank you very much, Gary.
That's really interesting. I think the whole issue around kind of spreading the risk is a really important one, and hopefully we'll get some questions kind of around that as we go forward. But I'll hand over to Paul now to kind of do your bit of talk and we'll do questions after that.
Okay, thanks. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks very much, Lottie. Interesting that you said that the Lake District was incredibly dry. So I have a solution to that. My daughter did Duke of Edinburgh last weekend, and it was the wettest weekend ever in the Lake District. So she's out for hire if you want a Duke of Edinburgh walk on your farm. It's interesting what you say about diversity. When we talk about trees, I guess one of the key things is that they moderate what happens on the farm. They sort of reduce the extremes. I did an agricultural degree perhaps 30 years ago, and in all of that course, trees weren't mentioned at all. So what I want to do in this sort of presentation is just give a bit of an overview of some of the things that I've learned about trees and water. And we'll sort of come back to this. I guess one of the surprising things about trees is you think, oh, they're sort of upstanding, sort of dominant individuals. But in those initial years, before a tree gets established, a bit like sort of children, they just can't really compete for water. And in those initial years, minimizing sort of that competition as far as possible for water and for nutrients for your trees really does pay dividends. Either putting a mulch on the soil, but trying to suppress that initial competition. So it still staggers me, this sort of photograph, comparing a tree suffering drought and nutrient competition compared to one that is not. So a bit like parenting, that investment, keeping the trees well supplied for water in those initial years, I think does pay dividends. And one of the reasons for that is we can express that the ability of a crop to take up water is related really to the length of the roots. And for a given mass of root, the length of root in a grass crop is almost an order of magnitude greater than in a tree. So until that stage when the tree has got those deep roots, in a head-to-head competition between grass and a tree, the grass will win. So you need to sort of help your tree through that initial period. Together with colleagues at Leeds University and the Royal Agricultural University, we were involved with at Cranfield looking at the interactions between trees and crops over a period of years. And we planted poplar at 6.4 by 10 meter spacing. And if you look at the picture on the left, we had alleys which had fallow on either side of the trees compared to having a crop. And in those initial years, until those tree roots get down, the uptake of water by those crops were actually sort of restricted tree growth. So I shouldn't be saying this. I guess I'm a regen sort of conference. It's maintaining that sort of balance. But it took almost sort of 7 years until those trees had established those full roots and were able to then gain that water and nutrients at depth from a different space than the crops, that the trees with crops on both sides started having the same height increment and the same diameter increment as on a tree strip where there wasn't that water competition. A little bit about trees and temperature. One thing with trees is that they moderate the environment. This is some research done in Germany. And in fact, we had just by chance, a meeting there last week, and it was scorching hot. But if you go into the trees, the temperature was about 7 degrees sort of lower. So generally, trees will reduce the temperature during the day, and then at night, temperatures will tend to sort of be higher. So you sort of don't get that sort of frost effect. So it's that moderating effect that becomes more important as the climate becomes more extreme. This is a photograph from the Dehesa system in Spain towards the end of the dry season, where they have these widely spaced oak trees. And you can see that there's sort of the areas under the oak trees there, where the temperature is slightly sort of lower, and perhaps more sort of nutrients. You can see the grass is still green compared to the areas where there isn't sort of shade. And again, the trees there reducing sort of daytime temperatures by 1 or 2 degrees, which can be sort of critical. And particularly if we're looking at animal sort of welfare, those sort of slight temperature differences become very important to talk indeed. And in this particular sort of research, they found that because of the sort of slower growth of the grass and it wasn't drying out so fast, the protein contents of the grass was higher under the trees as well. It's easy here, sitting whilst it's boiling hot, to just focus on the drought. But if we go back 3 months, it was all flooding and when's it going to stop raining? And just really to highlight that trees have a vital role in the moderation of water flows. It all gets very sort of complicated. It's the balance of the transpiration from the trees, ensuring the infiltration rate of the water into the soil, which tends, as Martin says, we've got that root network there, and the sort of lack of cultivation, so water will infiltrate more quickly in the soil. One thing trees also do, because of the massive canopy size, it sort of intercepts rainfall even before it reaches the ground. So at one level, trees will moderate sort of flooding simply because it's intercepting rainfall, which then sort of evaporates relatively quickly. So various bits of research showing if you've got woodland compared to grassland, restrictions or reductions in stream flow of sort of almost up to sort of 20%. And in Pontbrend in Wales, where a group of farmers worked together looking at increasing the level of tree cover in the landscape through planting sort of riparian strips and increasing sort of hedgerows. I think it was Imperial College did a fair bit of modelling on how that was affecting the water flow. And these are the sorts of values they were coming up to. So adding the tree shelter belts within the landscape reduced the sort of average flood peak by sort of 20%. If the whole area was covered in trees, the prediction is that the peak flood level would reduce by 60%. And if you removed all of the trees, then the peak flood on average would increase by 20%. I read the programme yesterday, and it said I would say something about hydraulic lift. So I thought, oh, I better put in a slide on that. So I read up on this last night, and what I read is a lot of the term is, rather than talking about this idea of hydraulic lift, that the roots can lift up water, it's the idea of redistribution. So it can go both ways. So effectively, the tree roots provide a sort of road system that can sort of move water through the soil. So yes, if you've got a water table, the roots, even when the tree's not transpiring, can reallocate water. But I was interested to learn at the end of the season, when you've got sort of dry soil at depth, the roots will also redistribute water down from wetter areas to drier areas of the soil as well. So really just to highlight four things. When trees are young, to look after them, they're very sensitive to drought. This role of trees in moderating temperatures, that they moderate water flow, remove those peaks, and certainly are very effective in reducing those sort of median flood sort of peaks. And this idea that trees will also sort of moderate the distribution of water within the soil profile.
Thanks, Paul. That was really interesting. It's just coming at it from a slightly different angle. And it's what I liked about that is, so if you are in an arable system where putting trees, and going fully silver arable where you've got trees throughout the field is not an option. It looks like actually just having shelter belts like Martin's hedges still provides really good benefits for both drought and flooding as well. A 20% reduction is still really good, even if you can't put a whole woodland on your farm. So I think one of the things that perhaps we sort of forget when it's very dry is then if we do get these periods of very extreme heavy rainfall, we are much more at risk of flash flooding if we're not managing our soil correctly. So I don't know whether you want to touch on, Martin, some of the things that you've been doing on your farm and your soils in order to kind of help against drought and, in a bit more detail, and how you kind of noticed any kind of exceptional circumstances when it's been flash flooding as well, that you're losing less soil from your farm too, and the kind of biodiversity benefits of not having big cracks in your soil as well.
Yeah, big cracks where the beetles and the English partridge disappear forever sometimes. And that is keeping the soil covered. If we get extreme rainfall, if it hits in soil, it's adding compaction and running off. We've found where we've got grass margins around the outside of all fields that have a slight slope, and then there's hedgerows that have a slight slope, you wouldn't think the water's running off the field. But the grass margin nearest the crop sides now, they've been in there probably 20 years now, 18 years, is nearly a foot taller than the ditch side. It's as if we've ploughed it up and raised the thing. It's just the sediment running off and getting captured in that hedge or in that grass margin, so keeping it onto the field. And that's fine soil particles, a lot of our nutrients as well. So we've prevented pollution into watercourses, but holding our soil on our farm. So it's like finding those multiple opportunities of not having bare soil. If getting a cover crop in if you can, or a catch crop, keeping organic material on the surface as much as possible. So you chop your straw back or keep trash on the top, cutting the straw a little bit taller. So doing all little measures that's just holding on to that, but also leaving the root structure there as much as possible, because that will hold the soil tight together. Where we have added some manures in and we've had to do a shallow cultivation to comply with regs to incorporate it, the real risk there then is it's leaving the field, because you've broken that structure of our soil. So for me, it's also little wins, but also spot the evidence of what you're doing, because there is little things, and it's like finding the soil is still in our grass margins, hasn't left. That's a bonus. That's more, we're paying £10,000 an acre for a field, a load of soil. We don't want it leaving. Keep it all on the farm, sort of thing. Yeah, and then also that rotation of, so when is that flash flood going to be? When is that stream going to be? So which crop do we grow, and sort of diversifying that out? And we're finding that soil structure being there better is actually avoiding those massive great cracks and really kind of opening up our land to wildlife has struggles and other things. So it's finding those multiple benefits.
It was quite interesting at Pont Brend. You mentioned a sort of an arable system at Pont Brend here in Wales. When they started looking at water flow in that system, you might think, oh, the grassland, the water's all percolating. What they were actually finding was because of sheep sort of compaction, effectively, there was a hardcore layer just a few inches beneath the soil, and the water wasn't infiltrating at all. It was almost like sheet runoff happening. You're not having the soil movement because you've got the vegetation cover, but the water wasn't percolating at all. So sort of putting in sort of hedgerows to capture that water, and perhaps sort of extending away from sort of set stocking so that you get a bit more stronger grass root sort of penetration were some of the things being suggested in that case.
Yeah, we'll open up the questions in just 1 second, but I was just going to say, you talked a lot about it's quite hard to establish trees in your arable fields. Have you got any advice for people when they're thinking about doing silvo arable, on how to make sure their trees are getting well established in droughty conditions? So
one thing is very often there's a plan to get plant trees in a given year, but you then don't get the material in time, or the permission for it to occur doesn't occur in time. So you think, oh, I'm going to plant in November, December, and then it becomes January, February, and you think, oh, I can just squeeze it in March. So certainly in sort of Bedfordshire, I think the Marston Vale sort of community forest are increasingly trying to move the sort of planting season, trying to find that planting material that's almost ready to sort of plant November onwards, so you to try and get things into the ground, and sort of perhaps just be patient. Perhaps the paperwork sort of suddenly come through and you say, oh, we've got to plant it this year. It may be sensible just to wait for the next growing season.
Yeah, thank you. For us, we're finding where we're putting a lot of hedgerow and that in. We started off by using a bit of Roundup, spraying a strip out, made planting a lot easier on bare soil. As soon as the drought or weather changes, the ground cracks wherever your spade mark is, it cooks the ground and cooks the plant. So putting some mulch in or leaving some shorter grasses there, bare soil is not good soil. You've got to keep it covered. So it's like, what mulch can you get? And also that biology in that, as that mulch breaks down, feeds the roots and that mycorrhizals, and that gets the system really kind of going. So it's like taking care but looking after a bit. And just on the grant side, it's been so frustrating to have grants available and stopping and starting and that. And it's like, what can we get when we're going to be hearing that we're going to be getting 150 million, I think, is the capital grants being announced later. So like, let's get them, but we won't be planting those trees till later in the year. So it's like, we've got to make sure these systems work for us when we can actually do the planting, and get early stock, get them in early. Don't plant late. We found that you end up with a dry spring, you've lost half it. You only get the grant once. You end up replanting it in your own cost if you want to get it really established. So do it well, do it once, and then you'll really benefit.